if we're ready to begin? Okay, terrific. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ann Nichols. I'm the statewide chair of Arizona Grandparent Ambassadors. And you can see that we have brought a few folks with us, members of our group. And we're going to tell you first, just for a moment, what Arizona Grandparent Ambassadors is. This is a group that started from some grandparents raising grandchildren who were part of a support group. And around the time that the economy had a downturn around 2008, 2009, they started losing services that they depended on, and they wanted to know what could be done about it. So Children's Action Alliance offered some training in advocacy, and the grandparents began to learn how the legislative process works and how to come up and tell their stories. We also are a support group and an educational group for the rest of the community about the needs of kinship families. Grandparents raising grandchildren, also aunts, uncles, other family members, and something called fictive kin. People who are close to a family, take in a child, may have no blood relationship, no connection, but they're willing to raise that child. One of the things that we know is that when children have to be removed from their parents, it's traumatic, it's dramatic, and it's really frightening for children. The state of Arizona wisely looks for family members first so that they can place children with family. It's less disruptive, it's better for children. So that when family can be identified who live in a place that's going to be safe for the children and healthy, DCS will bring those children, the Department of Child Safety will bring those children to a family member, and often it is a grandparent. If they don't, then they take them to stranger foster parents. Now, the foster parents who are not kin have had training, they've had a chance to learn the ins and outs of the process, they've had a chance to learn about the resources that are available. When children are dropped off with grandparents, they have no idea what to expect. And sometimes it's in the middle of the night, or just children are brought to the home and the grandparents are in shock. This is not something they planned on doing, but they're willing to undertake it because of love for the children. One of the things that we have learned through the Grandparent Ambassadors holds an annual summit. The greatest issue that is faced by kinship families initially is financial. If you can imagine not having had kids in your home and suddenly you have one or more, and they have medical needs, they have physical needs, they need clothing, they need shoes, they need dental care. Many things happen right away. You may have to buy a bed, invest in a lot of things that you hadn't thought about. And if the child has been left with you without any kind of support, it is a real crisis for your family. Now, the nice little chart we have here shows you that when children are placed with a kinship family, and that family, for whatever reason, we'll talk about that in a second, doesn't meet the criteria for becoming licensed foster parents, they receive a very different kind of assistance from what a foster parent would receive. The amount of money it actually takes to take care of a child in your home is about $640 a month. That's what the state has determined. And I was once a licensed foster parent. I've been both a licensed foster parent and a caretaker for grandchildren who needed help. As a licensed foster parent, I can tell you I didn't make money. The amount of money that I was given was barely enough to cover all of the needs of that child. So in comparison to the $641 a month that you would get if you were a licensed foster parent, you, if you're lucky and you know about it, could receive $164 a month from TANF Child Only and $75 from a Kinship Family Fund, which is the result of legislation that Grandparent Ambassadors sponsored. or advocated for. That's a big gap. That's a big difference. And many times the grandparents who are given the grandchildren are not, if they're given the information, it's not in a way that they comprehend it, because they're going through the shock of having these the children brought to their family, and maybe there's a piece of paper that says you might be eligible for something. Well, you don't have time to read it. So some of the work that we're doing this year, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is to try to respond to some of these problems. I do want to say one more thing before I introduce our people who are going to tell their stories. I want to say that we grandparents, once we're trained and we understand how to tell our story, and we start coming to the legislature and we learn the process, and we start responding in committee hearings, we start using the computer and putting in our comments, we are very, very persistent. And we're so persistent that sometimes we probably get a little bit annoying, and we have been called bags, badass grandmas. But we don't mind. We really don't mind. We would rather be badass grandmas for the sake of our children than to just be nice all the time. So we're going to tell a couple of stories, real stories. We're going to give you a slice of life. The first speaker is Kelly Appling, who is a member of Arizona Grandparent Ambassadors. She has a 5-year-old granddaughter with special needs, and she's going to tell us about her story.
Hello, everyone. I need help. These are 3 words that most people dread having to ever say. Many, like myself, only ask as a last resort, while many others will never ask at all, mainly because of pride or embarrassment, but nevertheless, we are still in need of help at one time or another. For the Arizona families that have opened their doors to take in and provide a home for a child relative, financial assistance is their #1 necessity. Imagine your life as it is right now, your day-to-day routine, and then bam, all of that changes in an instant. That is what happened to me. Prior to my grandchild's arrival, I was a single woman who worked full-time, slept in on the weekend, and occasionally splurged on Starbucks. When my 2.5-year-old grandchild was dropped off at my home one evening 2 years ago, she had only the clothes on her back and a small grocery bag that contained 2 outfits and 1 pair of pajamas. I was told that this would not be a permanent situation. I soon realized how untrue that was. You see, my grandchild was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and oppositional defiant disorder. Throughout the day, at home and at daycare, my grandchild would randomly scream and cry for an extended amount of time, punch and kick doors and walls, steal, act out aggressively to children and adults, refuse to follow directions, was impulsive, which many of the time caused safety concerns, and many other concerning behaviors. My evenings were no better. They now consisted of trying to console a toddler that would wake up screaming 6 to 8 times during the night, every night, for over 1.5 years. I was fired from my analyst position at a major healthcare corporation. My supervisor, aware of my situation, stated that in order for me to maintain my employment with the company, my work performance needed to be at 99%. At the time that all of this was going on, it was at 98.6%. After utilizing all of my savings, I lost the place that I called home for the past 4 years, and just last week had my vehicle repossessed. When this whole situation began, I needed help. But DCS never advised me about any financial assistance that I could have received to defray the new expenses I was incurring from my new little house guest. I began scouring the internet and found something called Child Only TANF. This benefit would allow my household to receive $164 a month. Unfortunately, trying to obtain the benefit proved difficult and time-consuming. I ended up having to contact different agencies through multitudes of calls and emails before finally receiving everything I needed. Once I completed the forms and sent them to the DCS worker as instructed, I was told that it was not her responsibility to assist me with obtaining that benefit. Despite the pushback, I finally received the child-only TANF benefit 4 months after my grandchild arrived. To this day, I feel that the only reason I was able to receive this small amount of financial assistance within the time frame that I did was because I was so persistent. I was persistent in my research, following up with people, and not accepting no for an answer. But many people may not have the know-how or perseverance that I have. Plus, why should anyone have to go through such a laborious process anyway just to get help for a child placed in their care by DCS? That's why we are thankful Senator Kate Brophy-McGee has introduced SB 1306. This will allow all kinship families to automatically receive the child-only TANF by streamlining the process to cut out the application process. Doing so will immediately help relieve some financial stress that we as kinship family providers endure, taking on the additional responsibility of providing for a child that has already gone through and lost so much. Thank you.
And now we have another person, Darcy Mentone, who's going to tell another story. And in this case, we're talking about fictive kin. And there are a lot of people who are in this position who are willing to take children in and care for them. They have a relationship, maybe they're a teacher, a Sunday school teacher, a neighbor, but it's difficult to do unless you can be told about the opportunities for assistance. And by the way, families can become licensed foster families. There are unlicensed kinship families, the majority, and there are licensed kinship families. But going through the process of licensure is a very, very long, 6-month minimum kind of process. And it requires a lot of compliance with regulations that sometimes are difficult to manage. So I just wanted to say there are the two kinds. But when the children are brought to you initially, unless you already had a license, you could not become a licensed foster parent for at least the first 6 months.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Kate Brophy-McGee for dropping this bill. This is so desperately needed in Arizona. My name is Darcy Mentone, and I was a fictive caregiver. My son befriended a boy who lived nearby. They soon became very close friends, and he would spend the night at our house sometimes when things were rough at home. He also had 4 siblings that my husband and I didn't know. Eventually, DCS removed all the children from the home. The 3 girls were sent to a foster home, and the 2 boys came to live with us. After about a month, DCS removed the girls from the foster home and placed them with us. I was the fictive kinship placement for 5 children, ages 6 to 17. I remember the first time I went grocery shopping for all of these kids, plus my husband and I and our own son, and I spent over $400. And that price was shocking. What was more shocking was how quickly the food went, and I had to go back to the grocery store. I remember that I didn't have beds or pillows or blankets enough for all of these children. They came to me with just the clothes on their back, and they needed school clothes and shoes and jackets and everything else a child needs. And I put those on my credit card, and they're still not paid off. One of the children was a high-risk type 1 diabetic who was actually in the intensive care unit when I was given placement of him. They all had neglected health, dental, and mental health needs. There were multiple appointments every week for counseling and doctors and dentists, and both my husband and I work full-time. We really struggled getting the kids to all of those appointments. I called DCS over and over again, and I asked for assistance. Please, can you please help me get the kids to their doctor's appointment? I can't take off any more work. Can you please help me? And every time I was met with silence and got nowhere. I called for help over and over and over again to DCS. In the first 3 months I had the children, we had 3 caseworkers. None of the caseworkers ever even came to my home. I knew that without support, there was no way my husband and I could adequately care for these children and meet the needs that they had. Eventually, I just couldn't do it anymore. DCS, instead of providing me with support, just came and got the kids. They placed the girls in another foster home. They've since been in 3 separate foster homes. They placed the boys in a group home. The boys immediately ran away from the group home. The police got involved and took them to a high-risk group home. They ran away from that group home and were missing for 4 months. No one looked for them. When they finally turned themselves in, they were sent to an intensive group home an hour outside of town, up in the mountains above Tucson. They were there for 6 months. What I know is that these are all good kids that have experienced major trauma. Instead of getting a stable home, they have been suffered to churn and churn in the system. I was told that I needed to become a licensed foster care provider in order to get any kind of benefit from the state. Those classes take 6 months, they're in the evenings, they're 30 miles away from my home, and they don't provide childcare. So I would have had to leave the children I was caring for in order to attend these classes. That didn't make sense to me. I've since learned that I was eligible for some assistance, but I was never informed of it, even through all the calls I made for help. I've since learned that although the state paid nothing for the children when they were in my home, they pay hundreds of dollars a month to a licensed foster care provider, and they pay thousands per month for a group home. My question is, wouldn't it have been easier and better for the children to support them when they were with us and in the placement that they wanted to be in, where they felt comfortable and supported? On his 18th birthday, the oldest boy, the one with type 1 diabetes, showed up on my doorstep and lives with us again. His DCS caseworker gave him a single sheet of paper showing that he was exited from DCS. However, she gave him no instructions on what to do now. His brother is still a runaway. You can Google his name and it comes up as a missing person. He's been gone for 6 months and we worry about him constantly. It seems to me that the state ends up paying so much in terms of financial resources and personnel resources by creating all of this unnecessary churn. Kids need love, but they also need a roof over their head. They need food and clothing and services. And those things should be provided to every child that is in DCS care, not just the ones that are licensed foster parents. Thank you.
And of course, when we talk about how much money the state is saving, we have to also think about what is the impact of a child on the child who had a home they wanted to go to and could not be kept there. And siblings separated is a common problem in the foster care system. So the damage to a child's well-being we will see expressed later in life. And we could have saved all of that by having better policies and better procedures for implementing those policies. It's a shame that when some financial assistance is possible, only a third of the people who are eligible get it, which is the case with the TANF child only. So you can see why we're here today. why we're here to tell some of these stories. We're here to advocate for the needs of our children, and we're here to hope that more and more people become aware of the needs of foster kids and particularly kinship families. We've seen some very good press. Pritzl articles about foster care system have been really, really helpful. But we need more. We need people to understand the issues and to understand that it can look great on paper, that we have all these resources. And if you cannot access them, it doesn't do any good to see them on paper. So we have in your press packet, you have 3 bills that we're working on today, and a 4th one has been introduced. And I just want to say, as we're closing, I want to say about that one of the ideas that we have, it's happening in some states, is that if the state looks at your home and decides that it is safe enough to place children in, that there should be some kind of presumptive eligibility for foster care reimbursement. And maybe not at the same level as those foster parents who've been trained, but for those first 6 months, while people might be trying to see if they could become licensed foster parents, they could get a regular stipend, more than what they get under the combination of TANF and the kinship care grant, so that they could begin to feel secure, be able to provide the needs of the children, and get ready for becoming licensed foster parents. Sometimes they'll never be able to be licensed foster parents. They could still receive a grant from the state that is more adequate than the little paltry amount that we're giving, and that chart just illustrates it. So that's it. Yes, the new bill that has, we don't have the number down yet, 2644, that's just been introduced, and that has bipartisan support, by the way, does provide for that.
And how much would that be? If you don't know the answer, that's fine.
I don't.
$250.
Yeah, I think it's $250 a month. Yeah. And there are other states that are doing this, so it's not unique. And in fact, the courts in Kentucky have required that the state pay the informal foster families, the unlicensed kinship families. They're required to pay. I think it's comparable to or close to what a regular foster family would receive, licensed foster family.
For those of you ambassadors who've been down here before and you talk to lawmakers and make this pitch, because you're basically looking for more funding, what do they say?
Well, the budget is tight. There are many priorities, and some of them, I think some people believe that the system works better than it does. And we have spoken to, we meet with people from Department of Child Safety, from the Department of Economic Security. We're not just talking to legislators, we're talking to officials in those departments. And of course we know there's a great deal of turnover in DCS. There are many issues of unfilled positions and very high caseloads. So a combination of turnover, high caseloads, low salaries mean that we do not get enough people in DCS to be able to do their job adequately. So there are a number of issues, and we bring them up and we remind them. As I say, we're persistent and we keep coming back. So gradually we're seeing little incremental changes, but it needs to be much more. And now that this year there seems to be a better revenue base, perhaps this can be the year that we will see real progress. Any other questions?
And that 250, is that 250 per child?
Yes. Now sometimes it's $250 per child. In some cases, and this is the case I believe with TANF only, it's $168 for the first child, but it's less for the second child. But yeah, $56. It's considerably less for the second child, and then the third child, and the fourth child, and the fifth child. But on the 250, I believe it's the same for all children. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming and listening to us. Hi.